Pharaoh himself says, "Take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and go." So we look at the Exodus route and we really don't think about the issues that it presents. I want to show you quickly images of the Sinai. I think you all know what it looks like, but I'll just scroll through some pictures here of the Sinai. And what is it that you might not see in the Sinai? It's like, okay, there's lots of sand, lots of rock, lots of stone, but where are the trees? Where's the grass? There might see one dry shrub. And where's the water? Where is anything other than sand and rock and a few dry shrubs? Because that is the Sinai. It is one of the driest, literally the driest places on earth. And it's known for that and has been that way for 10,000 years. And people tell me, yeah, but did you realize that, it's probably gotten green over time? They know that the Sahara definitely was green, but the Sinai, was not. Since the last ice age, for at least 10,000 years, this is what it has looked like. It has not had any grass at all. It is just what it is. It's about as pure a desert environment as you can imagine. And if you've been in deserts in the US or other places, there's always some life there. But the Sinai is pretty much lifeless. It is, as I said, noted as one of the driest places on the planet. This is the traditional route that we are told that Israel took through the wilderness. And this is what we are told that they took. There's a different maps, but they all more or less are the same. They leave from an area up near the Mediterranean Sea, and they go down across, whether through a few lakes here, or they go down the side of the Red Sea and across the Gulf of Aqaba, or others have them coming down and crossing the Red Sea itself. Others have them going through the lakes. But when you look at the maps, this area is absolutely teeny. We have no concept of how small this is. Small. I did a video on the letter of Aristeas, where 250 BC, where a Greek ambassador, went down and visited Jerusalem. He said the land in acres, if you work it out, I think 60 million acres, is about the size of 93,000 square miles. Well, the whole of the Levant, what we call modern-day Palestine or Israel, is about 7 or 8,000 square, not 80 or 90,000 square. So we're talking the whole of this area, looking from the tip of the Sinai up to the Sea of Galilee on this map. That's still not even close to the size of the kingdom that they saw Judea living in, or Judah living in at the time before Christ. So what's going on here, and how is this map so teeny? We just don't conceive of how small an area that they spent 40 years in. I'll go back to what Pharaoh said to Moses, "Take your flocks and herds and go." Well, if they went here, their flocks and herds didn't last a day or two or three, unless they were carrying for 40 years straw and hay and water. So even people couldn't survive here. Now we do know in the Bible that they got manna from heaven for 40 years. But if they were wandering around here for 40 years, what were they drinking? There's a couple of miracles in the Bible, yes, where the water's trained that was not fit to drink was turned into water that they could drink, and another time Moses hit a rock and water gushed out. But 40 years, do we see miracles with water for 40 years? We don't. So you have to, in my mind, say, okay, if they had animals with them, which is what Pharaoh said, take your animals and go, your sheep and your herds and all the animals they took out of Egypt, that means that animals had to have something to eat. And they also had to have water, and the people had to have water, and the animals weren't eating manna. So what were they doing? Did they just take their animals and the animals died the first day or two? I just don't think we conceive well enough that this area, doesn't matter which one of these we picture, I'll put this one up here, this land could not support 1 million plus people going for 40 years in the land with no water. Yes, they could get manna if that's where it happened, but where's the water? Where's the food for the animals? There isn't any food for the animals. It is a dangerous, dangerous place even to this day. And so the archaeologists, you can look this up yourselves, the archaeologists have said they cannot find signs of even 10,000 people wandering around here with camps for 40 years. There is no sign of anything. As I said, here's one map, here's another map. In all these maps, you will notice, okay, that they put Ramses and Pithorn and Goshen and all these things in Lower Egypt, in the delta area of Egypt. And yes, they call it the wilderness of Shur and the wilderness of Zin and all these things. The names are there, right? I'm not going to argue the names, but who put the names there and when. But at the time of Moses, and here are the ruins. The Gaza is in this area at the very beginning of the delta area. And so there are some pyramids there. But where was all the ruling really done? Where are the great ruins? They're in the Thebes area, the Valley of the Kings. That area. That is where all the tombs, King Tut and all the things that we see, they come out of this central or upper Nile area. So when Abraham went up out of Egypt, he went up in elevation, and he went south. Some people say the Negev, but he went up and south. And in those days, everything was according to the flow of waters. So going up, of course, is going up in altitude, and going south is the direction. Where he went, it doesn't say. But look at where the ruins are. Here's another map showing, and you can see where all the arrows are going. They're all going to this central part, just below where the Aswan Dam is today. That's this lake here. And other than that, these are the ruins. So the great ruins of Egypt that we think of, other than the temple, it's all on the upper Nile, the middle part of Egypt, way up the Red Sea. So Goshen would have had to be where, right? Goshen, where if Moses was put in a basket and taken in by the royalty. Well, the royalty lived in Thebes. That's where they lived, in the Valley of the Kings, that area, up at the upper Nile. They didn't live down on the coast in the delta area. And so Goshen had to be up in this area, no matter what the maps we have today say, because names are just names. Just look at Africa and Lake Victoria, or all the names of any lakes and stuff in Canada, the US, pretty much anywhere. Wherever people go to colonize, they change the name. So we can't just go by names. We have to go by what the scriptures actually say. And so if we put Moses living in this area where the Valley of the Kings is, and that they were enslaved in that area, building the works, the great works that we see there, they weren't living down in the Delta area, which places them in this area. They either crossed the Red Sea here, or they crossed the Nile River and went into the Sahara. If they crossed the Red Sea here, then these maps don't work, because Thebes is way down at the very bottom of the map along the Nile. It's not even on this map. And so they would have had to trudge all the way up to the Delta area and around the sea of the Gulf of Suez, as they call it now, and then down into the Sinai. Or they had to be way up here and cross this huge body of the Red Sea. But in the scriptures, where the word Red Sea comes from is Yam Suf. And Yam Suf is Sea of Reeds. And the reeds, the same word that was used for Moses' basket, which means papyrus, or reeds that would be found in fresh water. So either along the Nile or in the lakes in the Delta area. But it had to be in fresh water, not the Red Sea. So I don't believe they did cross the Red Sea here. But if we say that they went in here for 40 years, we have to ask ourselves, okay, Moses, was he crazy? I don't think so. He'd been a general. We read about that in Jubilees and other books. He'd been a general. He knew how to fight the Cushites. He knew how to go south and up the Nile he knew what was safe and what was not, which is why they avoided the Philistines. But if he knew, he also would have known that this was treacherous land to go into this area. So if we are going to say that we believe that Yam Suf, which is the Hebrew for the Red Sea, as they've translated to be Red Sea, but the real words are Sea of Reeds. So either, in my opinion, he crossed the Nile, or they crossed the little teeny lake here. But if they crossed the little teeny lake and went into the Sinai, then how does that make sense either? And a lot of the newer maps don't show that, because how did they cross? So that now they have Moses crossing down in the Gulf of Aqaba. But again, what's the point of that? If you look at these red lines, they come almost to the end of the Sea of Aqaba, and then they take them down and cross and then go back up. Well, Pharaoh, if he didn't want to go across there, he just have to go up here and go around. So we have to look at what is reasonable and what makes sense. But we're talking 40 years in this teeny little area, wandering around in this area. I think it's important to look at this map. Egypt was a superpower in its day, absolutely. One of the first, if not the first, great superpower. After the Sumerians, of course, had their great place too, but definitely this was one of the superpowers of, if not the superpower of its time. And at the time of Moses, it was at its greatest height and power. And so you see on this map, in purple is what they controlled, what Egypt controlled, way down the Nile, past Elephantine Island, and all the way down almost to Meroe in the Kushite areas. They controlled all the Delta area. They controlled all the Sinai. They controlled all of what we call Levant or Palestine today, all the way up to Damascus, all the way up almost into Lebanon. And this was their trade route, north and south. North for goods, south for other goods. But along the Mediterranean, it had to go through this area that we call Israel today or Palestine. And so purple, what does the purple mean on this map? It means Egyptian rule under Ramses II in 1250 BC. That means if Moses even went into this area that we're looking at, which I don't believe he did, but let's say he did, then there's a problem, because the land that's in purple is all the land that we say that Moses took as people. And yet there is zero record in the Egyptian records of any, not just King David or Solomon, there's nothing about either of them, but there's no record of any people after 40 years coming out and doing war against the Egyptians in Egyptian land. They had garrisons all through this purple area. They had garrisons for trade in spices and gold and other stuff that they're going all the way up to Turkey and all the way down south. This was their country. They ran it, and they were a military power. Just as we look at Egypt, in my opinion, today could be equated with the United States of America, or Babylon for others. But Egypt is the epitome of the great superpower of its day. And so if we look at everywhere that we say that Moses went, is all within Egyptian lands, Egyptian garrisons, Egyptian governors, Egyptian taxation, Egyptian control completely. We're led to believe that Moses went out into the desert for 40 years. Pharaoh was killed, and a big chunk of his army. And then we're to believe they came up here and lived in Egyptian land with no issues. They fought the people that were living there, who were already being taxed by Egypt, and fought those people. And then we're to believe that Egypt didn't say anything about this people that had killed off their army, now coming back and living in their land as neighbors. Get out the barbecue. So we have to at least try to look and say, does that make sense? Does it make sense that this teeny little area? To get a perspective, here's an ancient map of Africa. You can see along here, here's the Red Sea again. So we're talking about this little teeny, at the end of the Mediterranean, this teeny little area is the Sinai. And this is Africa. So if Moses took the people through the Yam Suf, or the Nile River, or a Sea of Reeds, and went out into this area was green 3,000 years ago. Even old maps like this show lakes like Lake Chad and different lakes and rivers flowing all the way through what is today Sahara Desert. And if you're interested, go look at a video by Trailback, and he shows some great caves in Mali, which is now fully in the Sahara. And in the caves, they have pictures, cave drawings of giraffes and antelopes and lions and animals that we picture in Africa, but further south. But in these days, Africa, in this area of where would be today Sudan Libya, through all that area, would have had a green, it still had desert, but it was still not like it is today in the Sahara. It was much greener, and it had water all the time. Not lots of it, but it had water, it had grazing, and it had places where if they did take their cattle this way, there was water, and there was places for the animals to graze, but there wasn't a lot of food because they couldn't stay in one place, and it wasn't really farmable land anymore. Yes, there was some water. So yes, they could travel, they could move here and there and prepare to go down into Sudan, I believe, and down towards Kenya. But the issue is, where did they go? Because if they went into this teeny little area up here, we've seen the pictures. The pictures sort of tell the story, right? I mean, take any picture. I'm just picking pictures of the Sinai. Like I said, there's pictures and pictures and oodles of pictures. You know, this is the Sinai today. And the Sinai today is no different than the Sinai was, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. It's just, where do you see the animals being able to live? And where's the water for the animals and for the people? It's just not there. If we see Moses, here's another map of Africa. If we see Moses living in this area, somewhere around Thebes, which would be right about here, and here's the Red Sea, and here's the Bab el Mandeb Strait, which has still got the name of Babel in it, but that's interesting. But if they did go down into this teeny little area, we're talking just this little teeny sliver of land, and spent 40 years there with no water and no grass, they probably wouldn't have had any animals for sure when they came out, because they would have all died. And people have asked me, well, what about the quail when they wanted meat? And that's a great question, because why weren't they killing off and eating their animals? Well, maybe so. Maybe they did all die. But I think what happened is they used their animals, they needed them for when they were going into wherever they're going to go settle. So you don't tend to kill off your animals. You live off the milk and you live off those things. And now maybe they did have a little bit of meat. But the father sent quail in to the camp, and a few times that happened, but that was a miracle. And water was a miracle a couple of times, it's mentioned. But the rest of the 40 years, they don't mention water, but they do mention the manna, continual manna, and the people complaining about the manna, for heaven. I want to talk about this issue. So we have a picture, I'll show a picture here of Moses, parting the sea, wherever that was, or the Red Sea, if you want to believe that, or the Nile, or whatever body of water he parted, like Joshua parted a river later on. But I believe it was the Nile, and call it the Yam Suf or the Gihon or whatever name you want to put on it. But I believe that's what they did, and passed through the river. And then it was a barrier to Pharaoh, so he had to go through or let them go. And so he tried to go through, and his army was wiped out. But Moses' statement is fascinating. He said, after today, you'll see the Egyptians no more. So when we go back to this map, no matter how Moses, whether you think he crossed the actual Red Sea here or anywhere he crossed the Red Sea, if we believe that, then the land that he was living in the Sinai, that was not only an issue with water, it was in purple, which means it was Egyptian controlled land. And if he took his people after 40 years up in here into Israel of today or Palestine, again, that was Egyptian controlled land. But it says, Moses himself said, after today, you'll see the Egyptians no more. So when he parted the sea or the river and they went through, they were not to see the Egyptians anymore. But who was living? Egyptians were living in what we call Israel today, or Palestine. And all along through here, this was territory completely dominated by the superpower. It was their land. They taxed it. They had governors. They had people ruling the area who were Egyptians. So if Moses spent 40 years out here in the desert, came up here with his people, as I said, they were living among the Egyptians, but they were seeing them. So why is Moses saying, after today, you'll see the Egyptians no more? But now if they went down here into the Sahara, if they followed ancient trade routes, which there were tons of the ancient trade routes that went down into the Sahara and through what would be Sudan today in that area, then that makes sense, because they were not seeing Egyptians anymore because they were out of Egyptian-controlled lands. Big problem that we don't talk about or think about is that, as I said, if this land in purple was controlled by the Egyptians, which it was at this time, then we have a problem, a big problem, because the Egyptians recorded everything: trade, commerce, marriages, alliances, all kinds of stuff. As I said, they never mention David or Solomon, which is another whole issue, which I dealt with in another video. But for this video, I want to talk about the issue if we believe they were down here, or even if we believe they were in the Arabian area and they came up into this area that we call Israel today. They would have been fighting who? They would have been fighting, if we call them Canaanites. I don't believe that is the land of Canaan either, but let's say it is the land of Canaan. If they were coming up there, who were they going to go to battle with? The Canaanites. And if the Canaanites were dominated and ruled by garrisons of Egyptians, the Egyptians would have brought their armies to protect their vassal state of Canaan at the time. I personally believe that Canaan was down towards South Sudan, somewhere down in Africa. And others don't feel that way, and that's okay. Not really trying to prove that, but I do want to make the point. Can you imagine an army of any army coming in and trying to conquer this part of Egypt and take the land? Well, they wouldn't have stood for it. Even if it wasn't even Egyptians, even if it was some king that was loyal to them, they still would have sent their garrisons out to battle Moses and his people. So he would have been fighting Egyptians and then living among the Egyptians. And yet the Egyptians never mention it in their 1,000 years of history. They don't mention this at all. We see, and people can comment on this, you probably need to have more understanding than I do, but the Amarna letters, the Egyptian military records, the Egyptian taxation logs, and the Egyptian royal correspondence show that this whole area in purple that we consider Israel today, all the way up to Lebanon, that was Egyptian land at the time of Moses and Joshua. It was not open land or even people that could be gone in and conquered without having to conquer a big chunk of Egypt and have an Egyptian army coming against you. So there's no Egyptian battle records. There's no Egyptian military response to Moses at all. No mention of Moses. No mention of any invasion. No mention of any rebellion. No mention of any conquest. There's literally nothing in the record in Egypt to show that. Now, the Egyptian records do speak of Canaan, but they don't say where it is, but they do mention Canaan. They also mention one Israelite king, one, and a battle that happened, but doesn't say that that battle was there. But for a people to be living there for 1,000 years, right side by side, with over a 1.5 million man army at the time of David, you have to say, how did that happen? How would they have let this great kingdom? That's like think of the United States. Imagine if some group in Texas said, yeah, we're going to take over Texas. Don't worry about it. I know we're Mexicans, but we're going to take back Texas, and you guys just don't worry about it. That wouldn't happen. They wouldn't let them take over a square foot because it was considered part of their land. And this land of Palestine and Gaza and all that area, that was considered part of Egyptian lands. So my solution, whether I'm right or wrong, but my belief is they never went ever in this way. I believe that Midian was down here. I believe the Philistines were down here in the Cushite lands, which in Cush we know, I'll show a map of that as well, but the Cushite lands were down in this area. The Cushite lands were down here, and they had a huge kingdom in Meroe and all that area. And I've done videos on Babel likely being down here in Babylon as well. But I believe that they crossed here and went into this area where you can see there's rivers. Now, this map is not from Moses' time, so don't get me wrong. I'm just making the point that even older maps show there was water in the Sahara, and if there was water, then there was game a little bit, but certainly there were grasslands. And if it's possible that Moses came this way, in my videos, I don't make claims, but I just want us to consider it. Because when I consider the area, the teeny area and with no water of Sinai, what we call Sinai, and remember even that name Sinai or the Negev desert, those names have been put on there. We know that Mount Sinai was selected by Helena of Rome in 325 AD and 325 AD. So that there's no proof that that was what it was called 1,000 years before her, or 2,000 years before, when Moses was there. Thanks for looking at these things today with me. I think they're fascinating. At least it opens your mind to question some things, why the Bible animals are all found in Africa as a group, not individual pieces, but the whole group of them. And say, okay, possibly maybe that is something going on here that I don't know. Please give the video a like if you did like it. If you didn't, that's okay too. But please take the minute to just give it a like, and any comments you can please put down, even if it's just hello from Granada or hello from Algeria, that's fine too. It helps the video and helps my channel. Thanks for all you do, and thanks for watching. I'll try to have another live. I just did one, and I'll try to have another live in the next week or so. And so keep an eye out for that. Here's a video that I just did about this issue of the Levant, and I'll try to put another one here. Here's one you'll like, but as soon as I get the new one, I'll put it there as I go into Africa deeper with this issue. Thanks for watching, and have yourselves a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.